There's something special about playing a game for the first time and being immersed in everything it has to offer. The graphics, the gameplay, the music, everything is a pleasant surprise. But have you ever tried going back to one of your favorite games and just didn't enjoy it as much? On a second playthrough, you kinda know what to expect after all. Sure, some games have multiple ways to play, making them infinitely replayable. But then there are also some games that are pretty much the same every time. These typically focus heavily on the story aspects of the game, requiring much of it to be scripted. Oftentimes, it seems like these games use gameplay as more of a challenge and story progression is the reward for it. On the other hand, you'll have games that are affected by your decisions, even changing the course of the entire story depending on what you do. It seems like either way, there's nothing that can match the allure of your first playthrough. I think the game that first taught me this was Undertale. If you were fortunate enough to not have been spoiled when the game came out, you likely did one of two things. Understood the tutorial and that you don't have to kill in this game, or you killed Toriel and reset the game. Of course, you could have just kept going if you killed her, but let's be realistic. Most people didn't mean to do it, so they reset. And to be fair, in almost every other RPG, we never have the ability to actually kill our allies. But if you did end up resetting, Flowey will remember and basically tell you he knows what you did. This moment was certainly the point where Undertale separated itself from your typical indie game, and it only continued to surprise me as I went on. Throughout the game, I was pleasantly surprised with the fun boss fights, hilarious dialogue, and amazing music. Nothing was particularly shocking. In fact, the ending is actually the same even if you did spare everyone. Of course, that's what it seemed like until you learned of the true pacifist route. In my opinion, Undertale is nowhere near complete without this ending, and fortunately for me, it was one of the parts of the game that I didn't have spoiled. So when I entered that lab and heard that music, I was pretty much in shock. Obviously, there was a ton of lore dropped here, but when I was playing this as a kid, I literally couldn't believe my eyes. This state of shock was pretty consistent all the way through the end of the game too. My jaw was dropped for almost the entirety of the final boss fight. After beating the game though, I took a long break from it, as I normally do with games. When I came back, I tried to do another pacifist run, but it just wasn't the same, so I opted for a genocide run. I saw how cool some of the boss themes were, and the fights were more challenging, so I thought it was worth a shot. Well, that wasn't necessarily a mistake, but it certainly wasn't fun either. If you can remember, everyone always talked about that last fight with Sans on the genocide route, and it really looked like there was a huge build-up for it, but when you actually go through the game, it's anything but that. The genocide run in Undertale was perhaps the most boring and unfulfilling experience I've had in a game, period. The only time I had some sort of satisfaction was when I beat a few of the bosses, but if I'm being honest, it just felt like a waste of time. This isn't a critique of the game at all though, since this mundane and challenging gameplay was intentionally added to show how causing pain for others actually ends up hurting you too. The point I'm trying to make here is, I didn't need to pick up Undertale ever again after beating it. There was nothing left for me besides causing pain for these virtual characters and, more importantly, myself. In my eyes, Undertale is a game that was meant to be played once, despite having multiple endings. However, some games are meant to be played multiple times, but still don't capture the magic of its first playthrough. The first game that comes to mind is Persona 5. Now, I played the base game for the first time last year, and it was pretty much a life-changing experience. It introduced me to a lot of the concepts I had never seen before in both gaming and in real life. I ended up going down a rabbit hole of philosophy and psychology after playing through Persona 4 and 5, which actually ended up inspiring some content I made on my other YouTube channel. This game was also my first experience with a JRPG, which now seems like a genre that I'll be sticking with going forward. Now I have all these positive things to say about the game, so why do I think it's not as good on a second playthrough? Well, first keep in mind that my second run was via Persona 5 Royal. Going through it the first time, I was pretty much just playing to get to the last semester of the game. At first, it was nice seeing all the new content and getting some confidants that I had missed out on, but after a while, it got very annoying to me. Anyone who's played through the game before knows where this happens, and after that point, it just feels like I was rushing to beat the game. When I got to the original ending of Royal, it felt like it was super rushed even though nothing had actually changed from the first game. I wasn't really enjoying my experience, and yeah, that's probably somewhat my fault. When I got to the actual new content of the game, it was definitely awesome despite knowing a lot of the spoilers already, which I guess happens when you play a game that's been out for years. As formulaic as these Persona games can get sometimes, there were plenty of twists and turns that I didn't expect on my first playthrough. That scene when you finally catch up to the story literally had me looking like the Miles Morales meme for a good 20 minutes. Not to mention, the fact that you can have friendships and relationships in this game makes it a lot less immersive once you know exactly what everyone's dialogue is. So yeah, I just didn't have as fulfilling of an experience with it compared to my first playthrough. That being said, Persona 5 Royal is still my favorite game of all time, it's just not as replayable as some other RPGs for me. Despite everything I've said so far, there are certain games that may be the same every time, but are replayable for the fact of how good they are. I mean, I've had to have played through Paper Mario The Thousand Year Door about 6 times at this point, and I'm not sure if it's just because of nostalgia or anything, but each time felt just as fun as the last. There's really nothing inherently different you can do on different playthroughs besides challenge runs, which technically has nothing to do with the game itself anyway. For some reason, the gameplay alone was enough to warrant coming back and playing. Now that I think about it, Nintendo is actually one of the best at making all of their games replayable. The core reason must be because of how they almost never slack on gameplay. Think about this, would you rather have a game that people enjoy playing over and over again if it meant that they were less emotionally attached to it, or would you rather have a game so impactful that people wouldn't want to ruin their original experience? This is likely a dilemma that many game developers have faced and struggled with. Truthfully, it's hard to decide which is better. Do I love infinitely replayable games? Absolutely. I love the idea that I can buy a game that will last me forever and stay enjoyable no matter what. Then again, do I love a great story that could potentially change my outlook on the world? Also yes. Despite this seeming like such a difficult decision, there are indeed some games which have been able to make an impact simply through nostalgia while keeping players around for years. Games like Minecraft, Animal Crossing, and all the mainline Mario games. These aren't necessarily the most story-forward of games, yet they keep people playing for thousands of hours. Perhaps with the right amount of nostalgia factor and fun gameplay, any game can be remembered fondly in people's hearts. If you couldn't piece this together already, I'm someone who really cares about the novelty of things. I was always that guy who was furious when something was spoiled for me in a show or a game. This clearly has affected some of my opinions on replaying certain games too, especially ones with significant story elements that can and will be spoiled online. A few weeks ago, I was speaking with a friend about this topic of replaying games, and he mentioned to me that he only ever played Undertale once, and he looks back on that game as a truly wonderful experience. He told me that he would probably never pick the game back up because why would he want to ruin that perfect memory? To me, this makes perfect sense. Not saying that I regret going through Undertale or Persona 5 again, but I definitely have to say that the way I look back on the games now is a bit different. Now, I have some extra negative emotions attached to my favorite games that previously never existed just because I wanted to play through them again. With Undertale, sure, I wanted to know what the genocide run was really like, but clearly it wasn't as fun as I thought it would be. And of course with Persona 5, I kinda had to play through it all again in order to get to the new content, but I just think the way I went about it was a bit too rushed. Going forward, perhaps I would try and avoid replaying games like these, or at least be conscious of the fact that I won't feel the same about it as my first playthrough. Recently, I replayed a game that I probably should have left on the shelf, Super Mario Sunshine. As a child, we often form memories with our favorite things. It could be our family, toys, or even video games. For me, one of my fondest memories as a kid was Super Mario Sunshine. A core memory for me was playing the game with the scent of garlic and oregano in the air coming from the food we got from the pizzeria. For years, I often thought deeply about these days and reminisced by playing Sunshine a little every now and then. I honestly thought this game was amazing and one of the best games ever made. Obviously, I was biased, but for me, those memories were so fond. This year, I picked the game back up on 3D All-Stars and wow, things were super disappointing. I'm not sure what was so different about things now, maybe it was just the fact that I've played better games, but I just didn't enjoy Sunshine anymore. Well, you know, in life we often try to relive the memories of our childhood. The problem with that is, well, we aren't kids anymore. There is real merit behind the idea that the less we know, the better, in a sense that we really struggle to appreciate the simple things in life once we've experienced so much of it. This doesn't mean that we can't enjoy things from our past, but it certainly means that we shouldn't try so hard to relive old memories. Instead, focus on creating new ones. So next time you have a super positive and memorable experience with a game, maybe hold off on a second playthrough.